The rain fell softly the day I stopped waiting. Not for apologies, not for answers, but for the quiet permission to let go of a love that had already left and to begin again without needing to be heard, just finally ready to be free. The rain had been steady since morning. It wasn't loud, not the kind that came with wind or thunder, just a quiet, constant tapping against the windows. It filled the house with a kind of stillness that made everything else feel even quieter. I watched it from the dining room, my fingers curled around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The surface of the drink had a faint shimmer, like a mirror, reflecting the dull gray of the sky beyond the glass. I hadn't taken a sip in at least an hour. It just sat there, heavy in my palm, like all the other things I'd been holding but didn't know how to let go of. It had been days since we really spoke, weeks since anything meaningful passed between us. He still moved through the house with the same rhythm, waking early, his shoes scraping against the tiles, the soft click of the front door closing behind him. At night, he returned like a shadow, calm, predictable, unreachable. His voice remained even when he asked about groceries or bills or whether I had eaten. But there was something missing, a hollow in the sound. The tone people use with strangers they don't want to offend. There was no fight, no slammed doors or raised voices, just the slow, creeping distance, like fog spreading through the corners of a room you once thought you could see clearly, like water leaking under a closed door, silent and inevitable. You don't notice it at first, you just start to feel colder. Then came the hairpin. I found it while scrubbing the bathroom sink. It had been wedged in the far corner, almost out of sight. Small, silver, a pearl at the end. Not mine. I'm not the type for delicate things. I held it in my palm like it might vanish, as though I had summoned someone else's memory just by touching it. It took a few minutes to place it. I'd seen it before. Months ago. At dinner, maybe. My sister-in-law had worn it then, her dark hair pinned up with a touch of elegance I never quite mastered. I remembered thinking how pretty it looked on her, how it shimmered under the soft lights, how my husband's gaze lingered too long on the curve of her neck when she laughed. Only he and I used that bathroom. I didn't ask, didn't mention it to her either. The pin sat on top of my dresser for a while, like a quiet accusation. Then it went into the drawer. After some time, I stopped noticing it altogether. That was easier. But my mind didn't forget. I started to keep a tally, not on paper, just in my head. A mental ledger of the things that didn't add up. The longer showers, the meetings that ran late, the faint scent of someone else's perfume when he hugged me goodnight. His phone is always face down. The sudden carefulness in how he spoke to me, like I might shatter if he pressed too hard. My sister-in-law Jiwon grew quieter too. At dinners, she sat a little farther from me, her laughter just slightly delayed. Her eyes darted when I spoke. She never met my gaze for long. My brother Daehyun never noticed. He was always so trusting, so sure that love meant safety. Maybe that's why she married him. Maybe that's why she drifted so easily into another man's silence. When I imagined them, my husband and Jiwon, I didn't feel rage, not at first. Just a hollow ache, a tiredness that settled into my bones like cold. It wasn't even jealousy. It was the slow erosion of being quietly discarded, replaced without warning, like someone rearranging the furniture while you were asleep. I began walking at night. I never planned it. I just find myself outside, hands tucked in my coat, the hush of rain in my ears. The streetlight stretched my shadow long and thin against the wet pavement. The quiet let me breathe. Let me vanish for a little while. The memories came uninvited. Our first apartment, the peeling wallpaper, the tiny kitchen, how we laughed when we burned the rice that night, his old habits, like humming while shaving. Those things used to feel like pieces of us. Now they felt borrowed, from someone else's life. Some mornings I watched him sleep, not out of love, just out of curiosity. I stared at his face, searching for something, guilt, regret, or tenderness. But all I saw was a man who had already stepped into another world. He was still here in body, but his heart had left quietly, leaving only a trace of warmth behind. Then one day I came home early. The house was silent, too silent. There was a faint scent in the air, floral, soft, unmistakably foreign. I stood in the doorway for what felt like hours. The silence grew heavier, thick like smoke. I didn't call out, didn't move. There was nothing to find, nothing to confront. The emptiness had already told me everything I needed to know. My brother called not long after. Jiwon wasn't answering his texts. She said she'd been distant. He asked if I had seen her. I said no. His voice was even, but something cracked underneath. I heard it. That little shiver when you try too hard to sound okay. I wanted to tell him, to blurt it all out. But I couldn't. I didn't know if the truth would set him free or break something that couldn't be fixed. So I stayed silent. The silence grew comfortable, familiar, like the smell of an old sweater. I stopped making dinner. He stopped asking why. We began orbiting the house like ghosts of ourselves. The small routines continued. Lights off by 10, shoes by the door, and dishes rinsed and stacked, like we were honoring some old version of love we no longer lived in. I found the wedding album while cleaning out the closet. The photos felt like lies, or maybe just echoes of something that once mattered. Smiling faces frozen in time, untouched by the years that followed. I turned the pages slowly, numb to what they once meant. The ring came off soon after. Quietly, no ceremony, just a finger suddenly bare. It left a pale circle behind, a ghost of commitment. But the longer it stayed empty, the easier it became to forget it had ever been there at all. The days stretched quietly after that. He still left in the morning and still returned in the evening. The motions repeated like a well-rehearsed play neither of us believed in anymore. The rhythm of our life together had thinned, faded, like an old song played too many times. We no longer touched. Not by accident, not by habit. The space between us had grown so wide it became its own presence in the house, something to step around, something to acknowledge without ever naming. I started sleeping on the far edge of the bed. Not out of anger, not even out of avoidance. It was simply that the middle no longer belonged to either of us. We didn't fight for the space. We didn't reach out across it. It was like a line had been drawn there, somewhere between silence and survival, and neither of us had the energy to cross it anymore. The nights felt longer now. Even when I slept, it didn't rest. It was a kind of waiting. For what, I wasn't sure. Maybe for him to say something, maybe for me to finally leave. But nothing ever happened. We had both grown so used to the stillness that even breaking it felt like a betrayal of our shared indifference. I stopped checking his phone. I had once watched it like a hawk, waiting for something to slip through. But over time, even the idea of catching him in a lie had lost its meaning. What would I do with the truth now, anyway? It no longer felt sharp. Just tired. Just sad. I ran into Jiwon once at the grocery store. She didn't see me. Or maybe she did and chose not to. She looked thinner. Pale, almost. There was a new necklace around her neck, something simple but too expensive for her usual style. Her hand lingered on her phone for longer than necessary. Her eyes never stayed in one place. It was the look of someone who had gotten what she wanted, only to discover it didn't feel the way she thought it would. I didn't say anything. I just turned and walked down another aisle, pretending I had forgotten something. In truth, I just didn't want to see my reflection in her regret. My brother still calls occasionally. He asked fewer questions now. There was a new softness to his voice, like he had started bracing himself for every conversation. I could hear the weight in him. He was unraveling quietly, but he never asked for help, just like me. We were siblings after all. Raised in the same house of silence, taught that love means not burdening anyone with your pain. There were mornings I'd wake up and forget where I was for a second. Not the place, but the life. I'd blink at the ceiling and expect something else, something warmer. It was always fleeting, like the last breath of a dream. Then the quiet would settle in again, and I would begin the day like all the others. One afternoon, I packed a small bag. Not because I planned to leave, not yet, but because I wanted to see what I would take with me. The essentials were an easy wallet, keys, and a worn sweater. The rest took longer. I stood at the edge of the closet, staring at my side of it. So much of it felt unfamiliar. Clothes I hadn't worn in years, shoes that didn't belong to this version of myself. Even my own things felt borrowed. I chose a book, a photo of my mother, a scarf he once gave me, back when his gifts still came with meaning. It was enough to know I could leave, that if one day I stood at the door with that bag, I wouldn't hesitate. The rain came again like it always did, that soft, steady rhythm. I took to sitting on the balcony now, under the overhang, letting the mist brush against my skin. It reminded me I was still here, still breathing, still able to feel. Some evenings I brought out a glass of wine and sat with my legs pulled up to my chest, staring out over the street like a stranger peeking into other people's lives. The neighbors still waved when they saw us together, still assumed we were fine. On the outside, nothing had changed. He opened doors for me. I smiled in public, but we no longer touched hearts. We hadn't for a long time. One night, he came home later than usual. I didn't ask where he had been. He didn't offer. He walked past me without a word, the air between us heavy with the weight of unspoken things. The hairpin had been gone for weeks now, tucked away in a box in the closet's deepest corner. But I still saw it sometimes in my mind. Still felt it, like a thorn beneath the skin. I began volunteering at a small bookstore downtown, just a few hours each week. The owner was kind. The space smelled of old pages and cedarwood. There was a quiet comfort in the routine of stacking shelves, sorting donations, and recommending novels. I never mentioned my life. It was the one place where I could exist without being someone's wife or someone's sister. Just me. Eventually, I started writing again. Nothing grand, just scraps of thoughts on napkins, notes in the margins of books, small confessions, captured in ink. It made the silence feel productive, made the pain feel like it had somewhere to go. There was no grand ending, no final confrontation. One day simply melted into another. Slowly, the shape of our marriage became a shadow, fading each time I stepped farther into myself. Then one morning, I woke before the alarm. The house was still. I went to the bathroom and caught my reflection in the mirror, bare-faced, eyes tired but clear. I looked like someone I hadn't seen in years. I went to the closet and found the box again. Inside, the hairpin sat exactly where I had left it. I held it for a moment, then, without ceremony, I wrapped it in a cloth and placed it into an envelope. No note, no message. I drove across the city and dropped it into a mailbox. When I returned home, I didn't feel lighter, but I didn't feel stuck anymore either. It didn't matter whether he noticed, whether she understood. It wasn't about them anymore. It hadn't been for a while. Later that day, I made tea and opened the window wide. The rain had passed. The scent of wet earth floated in, clean and new. The kind of air that makes you want to begin again. Not escape, just start over honestly, quietly. Somewhere within the stillness, I had begun to choose myself. And this time, that was enough.